A black couple is thrown out of a luxury store by a security guard, but 10 minutes later he faces an outcome no one saw coming. What led to his shocking downfall? Stick around to uncover the unexpected twist that will leave you questioning everything. The luxury department store buzzed with activity as well-dressed shoppers browsed through aisles of high-end goods. Among them were Alicia and Marcus Carter, a married couple who seemed to carry an air of quiet confidence. Alicia, wearing a sleek blazer and heels, looked poised as she admired a leather handbag. Beside her, Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, his laid-back smile softening the formal look of his tailored suit. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, laughing occasionally as they moved between displays. Neil Harris, the store's newest security guard, stood by the entrance with his arms crossed. He scanned the room with a critical eye, taking in the shoppers and their movements. Neil had always prided himself on being sharp and proactive, even if it meant making snap judgments. When his gaze fell on Alicia and Marcus, he frowned. Something about them unsettled him, though he couldn't quite say why. They were too comfortable, too at ease, he thought. People like them usually didn't shop in places like this, at least not in his mind. As Alicia reached for a price tag, Neil walked briskly toward them. "Excuse me," he said firmly, his tone loud enough to turn heads nearby. Marcus looked up, startled, while Alicia kept her composure, raising an eyebrow. "Can I help you with something?" Neil continued, his words less a question and more a challenge. Alicia smiled politely. "No, thank you. We're just browsing," she replied, her voice steady. Marcus nodded in agreement, stepping closer to his wife as Neil's expression hardened. "This area is for customers only," Neil said, folding his arms. "If you're not planning to make a purchase, I'll have to ask you to leave." For a moment, Marcus froze, his easy smile fading. Alicia's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her voice calm. "We are customers," she said, holding Neil's gaze, "and we haven't done anything wrong." Neil smirked. "Look, I don't want any trouble, but people have been watching you. It's better if you just go before we have a problem." Alicia glanced around, noticing the other shoppers now openly staring. Some looked curious, others whispered behind their hands. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his jaw tight. "We're not causing any problems," he said firmly, his deep voice steady. "We're just shopping like everyone else." But Neil shook his head, stepping closer. "I'm not going to repeat myself. Leave now, or I'll call for backup." The room seemed to grow quieter, the tension thickening as more eyes turned their way. Alicia's grip tightened on her handbag. She opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus gently squeezed her shoulder, signaling her to let it go. Without another word, they turned and walked toward the exit, their heads held high. As they left, Neil stood tall, feeling a rush of satisfaction. He adjusted his badge and glanced at a nearby coworker, who avoided meeting his eyes. "You've got to keep control," he muttered to himself, just loud enough for others to hear. "Standards have to be maintained." Unbeknownst to him, his actions had already set something much larger in motion, something that would shake the very ground he stood on. Outside the store, Marcus and Alicia sat in their car, the engine idling in silence. Marcus drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his usually cheerful demeanor clouded by frustration. Alicia sat beside him, her hands resting on her lap. Her posture was as composed as ever, but her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't one to let such incidents slide easily. Finally, Marcus sighed. "You think we should just let this go?" he asked, his voice tinged with hesitation. "I mean, it's not like it's the first time this kind of thing has happened." Alicia turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "Let it go," she repeated, her tone calm but edged with disbelief. "Marcus, that man humiliated us in front of everyone. We didn't do anything wrong, and he treated us like criminals." "I know," Marcus said, his voice softening. "But people like him don't listen, Alicia. What good will it do?" Alicia picked up her phone and began typing. "Maybe not for us," she said, her words deliberate. "But for the next people who walk in there and get treated the same way. It's not just about us." Marcus watched as she tapped out a message, her fingers moving quickly. "Who are you texting?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Caroline," Alicia replied without looking up. Caroline Hastings was not only a close friend but also the regional director of the department store chain. If anyone could address what had just happened, it was her. "You're really doing this," Marcus said with a small shake of his head, his lips curving into a faint smile. His frustration gave way to admiration. That guard has no idea who he just messed with. Alicia's phone buzzed almost immediately with a reply. She glanced at the screen and smiled faintly. "Caroline's at the flagship store tonight," she said. "She wants to meet us." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Tonight? She doesn't waste time, does she?" Alicia slipped her phone into her bag and straightened her jacket. "Neither do I," she said, her voice steady. "Let's go." As they pulled out of the parking lot, neither of them knew that Caroline was already deep in conversation with the store manager and that Neil's actions were about to backfire in ways he never imagined. Back inside the store, Neil leaned against the security desk near the entrance, scrolling idly through his phone. He occasionally glanced up, scanning the crowd with what he believed was a practiced, discerning eye. His co-worker Lisa approached him, her expression cautious. "Neil," she began hesitantly, her voice low. "Wasn't that a little harsh? That couple wasn't doing anything wrong." Neil scoffed and slipped his phone into his pocket. "Harsh? Come on, Lisa. You saw them. They didn't belong here." Lisa frowned, her discomfort evident. "They were just browsing, like everyone else. They looked like they could afford half the store." Neil rolled his eyes. "It's not about what they looked like. It's about keeping the atmosphere in here professional. People pay for exclusivity, not distractions." Lisa shook her head, clearly troubled. "I don't know, Neil. It didn't feel right." "Look," Neil said, his tone growing defensive. "I've seen enough to know when something's off. I don't need a lecture." Before Lisa could respond, the store manager, a stern-looking man named Robert, appeared. His sharp gaze darted between Neil and Lisa. "Neil, a word in my office," Robert said briskly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Neil straightened, brushing off Lisa's worried look. "What's this about?" he asked, forcing a casual tone as he followed Robert toward the back office. When the door shut behind them, Robert crossed his arms and leaned against the desk. "We've got a problem," he said bluntly. "A serious one." Neil furrowed his brow, confused. "What are you talking about?" Robert took a deep breath. "A customer complaint just came through about you. The couple you escorted out, do you know who they are?" Neil shrugged, his confidence unwavering. "No idea. Just some people who didn't belong." Robert's jaw tightened. "That somebody happens to be close friends with Caroline Hastings." "Do you know who Caroline Hastings is?" Neil froze. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't place it. I think she's part of corporate." "She's the regional director," Robert snapped, "and she's on her way here right now." "She's not happy, Neil. Not one bit." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Neil opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time that night, the weight of his actions began to settle on him. Robert stared at him for a long moment before shaking his head. "I suggest you think carefully about how you're going to explain yourself. This isn't going to blow over." Neil swallowed hard, his earlier confidence crumbling. As footsteps echoed down the hallway, the door swung open, and Caroline Hastings stepped inside, her expression unreadable. Caroline Hastings entered the office with an air of authority that instantly silenced the room. Her sharp navy blazer and composed demeanor gave no hint of the frustration simmering beneath her calm exterior. She glanced at Robert before fixing her gaze on Neil, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You're Neil Harris, correct?" Caroline asked, her voice even but firm. "Yes, ma'am," Neil replied, his tone far less confident than it had been earlier. He straightened his posture, trying to maintain an air of professionalism, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed him. Caroline placed her tablet on the desk, tapping the screen as she spoke. "I've been briefed about the incident involving the couple you removed from the store tonight. I need to hear your side of the story." Neil cleared his throat, buying time to gather his thoughts. I was just doing my job, ma'am, he began. The couple seemed out of place. They were acting suspiciously, and I didn't want to risk any disruptions in the store. Caroline raised an eyebrow, her expression remaining neutral. Out of place, she repeated, her tone sharpening slightly. How exactly were they out of place? Neil hesitated, stumbling over his words. Well, they weren't really looking like they belonged here, and, they were just lingering too long. It felt off. Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. So, let me get this straight. You decided to remove 2 paying customers without evidence or incident because they felt off to you? Neil nodded, though his confidence was quickly fading. Yes, ma'am. I was just trying to maintain the store's atmosphere. Caroline's gaze narrowed, her eyes cold now. And did you stop to consider that you might be basing your assumptions on something other than their behavior, perhaps something more personal? Neil's face reddened, and he avoided her piercing stare. No, ma'am. I don't judge people like that. Caroline sighed, picking up her tablet and swiping through its screen. Unfortunately, the facts tell a different story. She turned the screen toward Neil, showing surveillance footage of the incident. Alicia and Marcus were clearly seen browsing calmly, pointing out items to each other. The only disruption came when Neil approached them, his body language aggressive. Robert shifted uncomfortably behind Caroline as she continued. Neil, this doesn't look good, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. It's not just about this one incident. We've had other complaints, subtle ones, about how you've interacted with certain customers. Tonight's event, however, was not subtle. It was blatant. Neil's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked from Caroline to Robert, realizing he had no ground to stand on. The weight of the evidence was too much to deny. Caroline straightened and placed her tablet back on the desk. I want to make one thing clear, she said, her voice firm and final. This company does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. You have failed to uphold our values, and there are consequences for that. Neil's heart sank. He had underestimated the gravity of his actions, and now he was about to face the fallout. Before he could muster a defense, Caroline delivered the words that would seal his fate. You're dismissed from your position, effective immediately, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Clean out your locker and leave the premises. Security will escort you if necessary. The room was deathly silent. Neil stood frozen for a moment, his pride and confidence shattered. He stammered, but ma'am. There's nothing more to discuss, Caroline interrupted sharply. Your actions were unacceptable, and you are no longer welcome here. As Neil stumbled out of the office, his head hung low, Caroline turned to Robert. We're not done yet, she said, her tone resolute. This situation is bigger than one employee. We need to address the systemic issues that allowed this to happen in the first place. Robert nodded, though he looked uneasy. Caroline's words hung in the air like a challenge, one that would require more than a quick fix to resolve. Neil shuffled down the hallway, his uniform feeling heavier with every step. The buzz of the store felt distant, muted by the pounding in his ears. Coworkers glanced his way, some curious, others avoiding his gaze altogether. He tightened his fists, a mixture of embarrassment and frustration swirling within him. The shame of being publicly reprimanded and now fired gnawed at his pride. As Neil approached his locker, Lisa stood nearby, pretending to busy herself with inventory. She couldn't bring herself to look at him, but the tension was palpable. Neil slammed his locker open, the metallic clang echoing down the corridor. Lisa flinched. Say it, Neil barked, his voice low but laced with anger. I know you want to. Lisa hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was nearby. I warned you, Neil, she said softly, her voice tinged with regret. You didn't have to treat them like that. Neil scoffed, yanking his belongings out of the locker and shoving them into a duffel bag. I was doing my job, he snapped. People don't follow the rules, and they face the consequences. That's how it works. Lisa frowned, crossing her arms. But they didn't break any rules. You just assumed they didn't belong, and now look where it got you. Neil paused, his hand gripping the locker door. For a brief moment, he considered her words, but the sting of humiliation overpowered any introspection. Yeah, well, I guess they won, he muttered bitterly. Good for them. Lisa sighed, her expression softening. Neil, maybe this is a chance for you to think about why this happened, not just the firing, everything. If you keep blaming others, nothing's going to change. Neil turned to face her, his jaw tightening. Save the lecture, Lisa, he said, slinging the duffel bag over his shoulder. I'm out of here. As he walked away, Lisa watched him with a mixture of pity and disappointment. She had hoped this experience might force Neil to reflect, but it was clear he wasn't ready to face the truth. Meanwhile, back in the office, Caroline was pacing as she discussed next steps with Robert. We can't just fire him and think the problem is solved, she said firmly. There's clearly a culture here that allows this behavior to fester. Robert nodded reluctantly. You're right. But where do we start? We've done diversity training before, but clearly, it's not enough. Caroline stopped pacing and placed her hands on the desk. We need to go deeper, real training, not just check-the-box sessions. And we need to make it clear to both employees and customers that this is a priority. I'll start by meeting with Alicia and Marcus tonight. They deserve to hear what steps we're taking directly from me. Robert raised an eyebrow. You're meeting with them? Yes, Caroline said firmly. This isn't just about saving face. It's about rebuilding trust, not just with them, but with every customer who's ever felt unwelcome in our stores. The determination in Caroline's voice left no room for doubt. Change was coming, and it wouldn't be superficial. Alicia and Marcus sat in a private lounge within the flagship store, their expressions calm but expectant. Caroline entered the room with a measured stride, her professional demeanor tempered with an air of sincerity. She greeted them with a firm handshake, her tone apologetic yet resolute. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Caroline began as she took a seat across from them. I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened tonight. What you experienced was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for ensuring it never happens again. Alicia studied Caroline carefully, her sharp eyes searching for any sign of insincerity. Satisfied, she leaned forward slightly. It's not just about an apology, Caroline, she said evenly. This isn't the first time we've been treated like this. What happened tonight is part of a larger problem. Marcus nodded in agreement. It's exhausting, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. Walking into spaces where we have every right to be, only to be made to feel like intruders. Caroline listened intently, nodding as they spoke. I understand, she said. And you're absolutely right. Tonight's incident is a symptom of a much bigger issue, one that we need to address, not just at this store, but across the company. Marcus raised an eyebrow. So what are you planning to do about it? Caroline reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table. I've already taken immediate action, she said. The security guard in question has been terminated, effective immediately. But I know that firing one person doesn't fix systemic problems. That's why I'm launching a comprehensive review of our policies and practices, starting with employee training. She opened the folder, showing them an outline of initiatives. We're implementing mandatory, in-depth bias training for all employees. From frontline staff to executives. We're also introducing an anonymous reporting system so customers and employees can safely share concerns without fear of retaliation. Alicia studied the documents, her expression thoughtful. This is a start, she said after a moment. But training and policies alone won't change attitudes. What's your plan to ensure this isn't just a box-ticking exercise? Caroline smiled faintly. I knew you'd ask that, she said. We're partnering with experts in diversity and inclusion to develop programs that focus on empathy and accountability. It's going to take time, but I'm committed to making meaningful changes. Marcus crossed his arms, his skepticism still evident. And what about the customers who've already been wronged? People like us, who've been made to feel small in your stores. Caroline nodded, her expression serious. "That's part of the conversation we're having now. I'm grateful you reached out, and I want to work with you both to ensure these changes are effective. If you're willing, I'd like your input as we move forward." Alicia exchanged a glance with Marcus. "We'll hold you to that," she said firmly. "This can't just be about words on paper. It needs to make a real difference." Caroline stood and extended her hand once more. "Agreed," she said. "And I promise, this isn't the end of the conversation, it's just the beginning." As Caroline left the room, Alicia and Marcus sat quietly for a moment. "Do you think she means it?" Marcus asked. Alicia tapped the edge of the folder thoughtfully. "She might," she said. "But it's up to us to make sure she follows through." Outside, Caroline walked briskly back to her office, her mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. This wasn't just about salvaging a brand, it was about creating a culture that lived up to its promises, and she was determined to get it right. Neil sat alone in the dim light of his small apartment, the reality of his termination finally sinking in. The duffel bag he'd packed from his locker sat untouched on the floor, and his uniform shirt lay crumpled on the couch. He stared blankly at his phone, the screen showing a barrage of missed calls and texts from friends and family. Most were curious or concerned, but Neil couldn't bring himself to answer any of them. His thoughts raced as he replayed the events of the evening. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Had he overstepped? Was it really as bad as everyone made it out to be? He reached for the remote and turned on the TV, hoping to distract himself. Instead, he was met with a local news segment reporting on the incident. The headline blared, "Luxury store faces backlash after alleged discrimination." Neil's stomach dropped as he watched the story unfold. The news anchor recounted the altercation, describing the couple as well-respected professionals and the store's actions as shocking and unacceptable. A blurred photo of Alicia and Marcus leaving the store appeared on the screen, along with statements from witnesses who called the incident disgraceful. Neil's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He quickly turned off the TV, but the words lingered in his mind: disgraceful, unacceptable. The weight of those judgments pressed down on him, and for the first time, he began to question his actions. He leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "It wasn't that bad," he muttered, trying to convince himself. "I was just doing my job." But the memory of Caroline's words, her unflinching declaration that his behavior had crossed a line, kept replaying in his head. Unable to sit still, Neil grabbed his phone and scrolled through social media. To his dismay, posts about the incident were already trending. Some users shared their outrage at the couple's treatment, while others speculated about systemic issues within the store's culture. One comment struck him like a punch to the gut: "This isn't about one bad employee, it's about an entire mindset." Neil tossed his phone aside, frustration bubbling over. He wanted to dismiss it all, to blame the couple, the store, anyone but himself. But deep down, he felt the first twinges of something unfamiliar: guilt. As he sat there, his thoughts turned to Lisa's parting words: "If you keep blaming others, nothing's going to change." He hated how her voice echoed in his head, but he couldn't deny the truth of it. Maybe he had been wrong. And maybe it was time to face that. But the question lingered: what was he supposed to do now? With his career in shambles and his reputation tarnished, Neil found himself at a crossroads, unsure of how to move forward. For the first time in years, he felt utterly lost. At the store, Caroline gathered her leadership team in the conference room for an emergency meeting. The weight of the night's events hung heavy in the air as the team settled into their seats, exchanging nervous glances. The incident with Neil had quickly spiraled into a public relations crisis, and Caroline knew they couldn't afford to handle it poorly. She stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding attention. "Let me be clear," she began, her voice steady but firm. "What happened tonight is unacceptable, not just because it made headlines, but because it goes against everything we claim to stand for as a company. This is bigger than one guard's actions." A junior manager hesitantly raised his hand. "Caroline, firing Neil was the right call, but do you really think this is going to blow over? The media is running with it." Caroline nodded, acknowledging the concern. "I'm not interested in making this blow over. I'm interested in fixing what's broken." And make no mistake, this is systemic. We've ignored the signs for too long, complaints brushed aside, shallow training sessions, a lack of accountability. It stops now. Another manager spoke up, her voice filled with uncertainty. Where do we even start? This feels so big. Caroline took a deep breath, pulling out a stack of papers from her folder. We start with honesty and transparency. Tomorrow morning, we release a public statement acknowledging what happened. No excuses. No corporate jargon. Just the truth and a commitment to change. The room fell silent, her words sinking in. Caroline continued, her tone softening but retaining its resolve. Next, we involve our employees. This isn't just about policies, it's about culture. We'll organize listening sessions where staff at every level can share their experiences. We need to hear their voices if we're going to create real change. The senior HR manager nodded in agreement. And training, she asked. The current modules clearly aren't enough. Not even close, Caroline replied. We'll overhaul them completely. I've already reached out to specialists in bias and inclusivity training. This isn't going to be a one-off session. It will be ongoing, with measurable outcomes. Everyone, managers, staff, and yes, even corporate, will participate. Robert, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. What about the public? How do we convince customers that we're serious about this? Caroline turned to him, her gaze steady. By showing them. Words won't be enough. We need to rebuild trust, and that starts with action. I'm inviting Alicia and Marcus to collaborate with us on these initiatives. Their perspective is invaluable, and their willingness to engage could help shape the path forward. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Involving the couple directly was a bold move, but it aligned with Caroline's no-nonsense approach. She could feel the unease from some of the team members, but she pressed on. This is going to be hard, she admitted. It's going to take time, effort, and resources. But if we don't do this now, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes. That's not an option. As the meeting concluded, Caroline stayed behind, gazing out the window at the empty streets below. The enormity of the task ahead weighed on her, but so did a growing sense of determination. This wasn't just about salvaging the company's reputation, it was about setting a new standard, one that wouldn't allow prejudice to fester under the guise of professionalism. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning, the department store's social media accounts released a carefully crafted statement written under Caroline's watchful eye. It struck a balance between accountability and a promise for change. We deeply regret the incident that occurred in our store yesterday evening. The actions taken by our former employee do not reflect the values we stand for. We acknowledge the pain this caused to the individuals involved and to our broader community. We are committed to making meaningful changes to ensure that all who walk through our doors feel respected and valued. This is our pledge, to listen, to learn, and to act. The statement spread quickly, garnering a mixed response. While some commended the store for its quick action, others were skeptical. Comments ranged from "this is a good start" to "let's see if they actually do anything" and "talk is cheap." Alicia scrolled through the responses, sipping her coffee at the kitchen counter. She glanced at Marcus, who was reading an article about the incident on his tablet. At least they're admitting they messed up, she said, her tone measured. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Admitting it is one thing. Doing something about it is another. Just as he spoke, Alicia's phone buzzed with a call from Caroline. She answered, putting it on speaker. Good morning, Caroline. Good morning, Alicia. Marcus, Caroline said, her voice steady but with a tinge of exhaustion. I wanted to personally thank you for giving us the opportunity to address this. I know it's not your responsibility to guide us, but your input is invaluable. Alicia leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. Caroline, I appreciate the apology, and I see the effort you're putting in. But like Marcus said, it's actions that matter. What are you expecting from us? Caroline didn't hesitate. I'd like your help shaping our new initiatives. We need perspectives like yours to ensure the changes we make are meaningful. This includes consulting on our new training programs and joining a panel discussion for employees about the impact of discrimination. Marcus set his tablet down, giving the phone his full attention. You're asking us to take a seat at your table? Yes, Caroline said. We can't do this alone, and I won't pretend we can. Your involvement would mean a lot, not just to us, but to the employees who need to hear stories like yours. There was a pause as Alicia and Marcus exchanged a glance. Finally, Alicia spoke. We'll consider it, but only if we see genuine progress. We're not here to be a PR move. Caroline's voice softened. I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean it. I understand your hesitation, but I promise this isn't about optics. It's about building something better. After the call ended, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. What do you think? Alicia looked out the window, her brow furrowed. I think if we don't help, nothing changes. But I also think it's a lot of responsibility. Marcus nodded. If we do this, we hold them accountable. No shortcuts. Alicia smiled faintly. Agreed. Let's see what they're really willing to do. At the store, Caroline gathered her team for a follow-up meeting. The public response had sparked debates among employees, with some defending Neil's actions while others supported the company's commitment to change. Caroline knew the coming weeks would be crucial in setting the tone for the store's future. This isn't about optics or silencing criticism, she told the team. It's about creating a culture where incidents like this don't happen again. And that starts with each of us. The first steps were in motion, but Caroline knew the hardest part was still ahead, winning back trust, both from her employees and the public. The store's break room buzzed with muted conversations as employees trickled in for a scheduled meeting. It wasn't a typical staff gathering. The announcement of new inclusivity measures and the fallout from the recent incident had sparked a mix of curiosity and tension. Some employees exchanged cautious glances, while others whispered about whether they'd have to sit through another boring seminar. Lisa sat quietly at one of the tables, her arms crossed as she observed the room. She noticed some of Neil's former allies' employees who often joked along with him, sitting in a corner, their expressions wary. Across the room, a younger employee whispered to a coworker, "Do you think they're going to make us do role-playing exercises again? Last time, that was just awkward." The chatter quieted when Caroline entered, her confident steps commanding attention. She stood at the front of the room, flanked by two trainers she'd brought in to lead the discussion. Behind them, a screen displayed the words, "Moving forward, building a culture of respect." Thank you all for being here, Caroline began, her tone steady but approachable. I know there's been a lot of uncertainty and tension in the air, and I want to address it head on. She paused, scanning the room. What happened last week was unacceptable. We failed our customers and ourselves. And while the actions of one employee were the immediate cause, we need to acknowledge that this incident didn't happen in isolation. It's a symptom of a larger issue, a culture that hasn't prioritized inclusion as much as it should. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement. Lisa leaned forward, her attention sharpening. Caroline continued. This isn't about blaming or shaming anyone here. It's about recognizing where we've fallen short and committing to do better. That starts with understanding each other, our biases, and the impact of our actions. The trainers stepped forward and introduced themselves, explaining the structure of the session. This wasn't going to be a one-off lecture, they said, but an ongoing series of workshops aimed at creating a more inclusive environment. The first session would focus on understanding unconscious bias and its effects. One trainer, a man with a calm demeanor, began with a story about his own experience with bias. As he spoke, the room started to relax, employees listening more attentively. He then posed a question to the group: have you ever made an assumption about someone that turned out to be wrong? How did that assumption affect your actions? There was a pause before Lisa raised her hand. I have, she said, her voice steady. I've assumed things about customers based on how they dressed or spoke, and have probably treated them differently because of it. It's not something I'm proud of. Her honesty seemed to open the floodgates. Other employees began sharing their experiences, some hesitantly, others with surprising candor. A middle-aged cashier admitted to unintentionally being colder to non-English speaking customers. A younger staff member spoke about feeling overlooked by management because of his age. Caroline watched silently, taking in every word. This was what she had hoped for: honest conversations that could pave the way for change. Then one of Neil's former allies, a security guard named Derek, raised his hand. "I'm going to be real here," he said. "I thought Neil was just doing his job. But after hearing all this, maybe he could have handled things differently. Still, it's hard when you're in the moment and feel like you have to act fast." Caroline nodded, her expression understanding. "Thank you for sharing that, Derek. I want to emphasize that this isn't about condemning anyone for their instincts. It's about learning to question those instincts and act with intention instead of assumption." The session ended with the trainers assigning a reflective exercise for employees to complete before the next workshop. As people filed out, the atmosphere in the room felt lighter, though the undercurrent of uncertainty remained. Lisa caught up with Derek near the exit. "That was big of you," she said. "What you said in there." Derek shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Yeah, well, maybe Neil wasn't completely right. Doesn't mean I'm completely wrong, either." Lisa gave him a half smile. "Nobody's saying you are. But it's a start." As Caroline watched the employees leave, she felt a flicker of hope. The session hadn't solved everything, but it had planted seeds. Now it was up to her and her team to nurture them, ensuring the changes didn't just stay in the room but grew into something real and lasting. Later that afternoon, Caroline met with her senior leadership team to assess the feedback from the first workshop and plan the next steps. Around the table, expressions ranged from cautiously optimistic to outright skeptical. Robert, who had been with the company for over a decade, leaned forward with a clipboard in hand. "The session seemed to go well," Robert began. "Employees opened up more than I expected. But there's still a lot of hesitation. Some people don't think this will lead to real change." Caroline nodded. "That's understandable. Words only go so far. It's the follow-through that matters." A younger manager, Priya, chimed in. "The fact that people shared openly was a good sign. But we need to address the underlying fears. Some employees are worried this will turn into a witch hunt, where every mistake is blown out of proportion." Caroline folded her hands, considering Priya's point. "We need to emphasize that this initiative isn't about punishment, it's about growth. We're not trying to embarrass or single anyone out. The goal is to build a culture where these incidents don't happen in the first place." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "There's one thing we haven't fully discussed: the public perception issue. The statement we released was a good start, but the media is still running with the story. If we don't show concrete progress soon, it could hurt us long term." Caroline sighed, the weight of the situation pressing on her shoulders. "You're right. The public needs to see that we're serious about this. But I don't want to rush out superficial fixes just to satisfy the news cycle. We need substance." Priya hesitated, then spoke again. "What about Alicia and Marcus? Have they agreed to collaborate yet? Including their voices could show that we're taking this seriously." Caroline glanced at the folder in front of her. "They're considering it. Alicia wants to see tangible progress before committing fully. I don't blame her, they've probably heard too many empty promises before." Robert leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "If they agree, what's the plan?" Caroline tapped her pen against the folder. "I want them to co-lead a panel discussion with some of our employees. Real stories, real experiences, on both sides. It'll be uncomfortable, but that's the point. Change doesn't happen in comfort." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Robert nodded slowly. "It's bold. It might work." Caroline stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "We don't have time to second-guess boldness. Every day we wait is another day we fail our employees and customers. Let's get started." That evening, Marcus and Alicia sat in their living room, reviewing an email from Caroline outlining the proposed panel discussion. Marcus frowned, setting his laptop aside. "She's asking a lot," he said. "Sharing our story in front of their employees, that's personal." Alicia glanced at him, her face thoughtful. "It is," she admitted. "But isn't that the point? If we want them to understand, we have to make it personal." Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. "What if it backfires? What if they twist our words or it turns into a PR stunt?" Alicia reached for his hand, her voice soft but firm. "If we don't speak up, someone else will go through what we did. And maybe they won't have the same chance to push for change." Marcus sighed, his resistance fading. "You always know how to guilt me into doing the right thing," he said with a faint smile. The day of the panel discussion arrived quickly. The store's conference hall had been transformed into a professional yet inviting space. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged, a small stage stood at the front, and cameras discreetly positioned at the back signaled that the event was being recorded for internal use. Employees filed in with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, murmuring amongst themselves as they settled into their seats. Caroline stood near the stage, quietly briefing Alicia and Marcus. Both were dressed sharply, exuding their usual grace, though Marcus's crossed arms betrayed his unease. Alicia, ever composed, listened carefully as Caroline outlined the flow of the discussion. "Remember, this isn't about pointing fingers," Caroline said, her tone reassuring. "It's about sharing experiences and creating understanding. We'll open the floor for questions, but you're not obligated to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're asking us to bare our souls in front of your staff. Uncomfortable is already baked into the deal." Caroline offered a faint smile. "I won't pretend it's easy, but I believe this is how real change starts." As employees settled, Caroline took the stage and introduced the panel discussion. She explained its purpose, to shed light on how bias, whether conscious or unconscious, affects customers, employees, and the company as a whole. "Today, we have the honor of hearing from Alicia and Marcus Carter," she said. "Their courage in sharing their story with us is a gift, and I ask that you listen with open minds and hearts." Alicia leaned into the microphone first. Her voice was calm but carried an undeniable strength. "What happened to us that night wasn't new," she began. "It was one of many experiences where we were judged not by who we are, but by what someone assumed about us." She recounted the events at the store, describing how Neil's actions made them feel humiliated and excluded. She chose her words carefully, balancing honesty with restraint, but her emotions were clear. "The most painful part wasn't being asked to leave," she said. "It was the message behind it: you don't belong here. That's a message we've heard too many times in too many places." Marcus followed, his tone more direct. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he said. "It was infuriating. We walked in as paying customers, and we left feeling like suspects. That's not just bad customer service, it's a symptom of something bigger." The room was silent, the weight of their words sinking in. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in quiet agreement. A few glanced around, as if gauging how their co-workers were reacting. After Alicia and Marcus shared their story, Caroline invited employees to ask questions or share their own experiences. At first, the room remained silent, the hesitation palpable. Then Lisa raised her hand. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice steady. "Hearing your story made me realize how much I've overlooked in my own actions. I've caught myself making snap judgments, and honestly, it's something I need to work on." Her honesty seemed to break the ice. One by one, other employees began speaking up. A cashier shared how she'd felt excluded by coworkers because of her accent. A stockroom worker admitted to joking about stereotypes without realizing how harmful they could be. Even Derek, Neil's former ally, stood and said, "I didn't see it before, but hearing this, I get it now. I see how easy it is to dismiss people without even thinking." Alicia and Marcus listened intently, responding with empathy and encouragement. "The fact that you're recognizing it is a step forward," Alicia said to Derek. "That's where change starts." As the session neared its end, Caroline took the microphone again. This isn't the end of the conversation, she said, her voice firm. This is the beginning of a new chapter for our company, a chapter where we hold ourselves accountable, learn from each other, and commit to doing better. Not just for our customers, but for each other. The room erupted into applause, a mixture of respect for Alicia and Marcus's courage and appreciation for the honesty that had filled the room. Marcus leaned over to Alicia and whispered, "Maybe this won't be a circus after all." Alicia smiled. "Maybe not. But there's still work to do." As employees filed out, the atmosphere felt lighter, as though a barrier had been broken. Caroline stood with Alicia and Marcus near the stage. "I can't thank you enough," she said sincerely. "What you shared today will stay with them and with me." "We'll see," Alicia said with a nod. "Change takes time, but this is a start." Caroline watched them leave, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. This was indeed just the beginning, and she was ready for the long road ahead. That evening, Alicia and Marcus returned home, the weight of the day still lingering in the air. Marcus set his keys on the counter and flopped onto the couch, letting out a long sigh. Alicia poured 2 glasses of wine and joined him, handing him a glass before sinking into the cushion beside him. "You think they got it?" Marcus asked, swirling his wine. "Or are we just another story they'll talk about for a week and forget?" Alicia leaned her head back, staring at the ceiling. "I think some of them got it," she said. "Lisa, Derek, even a few of the others. But it's not about them understanding us, Marcus, it's about them understanding themselves." Marcus nodded slowly, taking a sip. It's hard, you know? Putting yourself out there like that makes me wonder if it's even worth it." "It is," Alicia said firmly. She turned to him, her eyes steady. "If even one person in that room changes how they treat someone because of what we said, then it's worth it. We've dealt with this for years. Maybe now someone else won't have to." Marcus didn't respond right away, but the hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You always find a way to make me believe," he said quietly. The moment of calm was interrupted by Alicia's phone buzzing on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen and raised an eyebrow. "It's Caroline," she said, showing Marcus the screen before answering. "Hello, Caroline. Everything all right?" On the other end, Caroline's voice sounded surprisingly upbeat. "I didn't want to bother you this late, but I thought you'd want to know. We've already started receiving feedback from employees about the panel, and it's positive. A lot of them said it was eye-opening." Alicia's lips curled into a faint smile. "That's good to hear. It's a step." "It's more than that," Caroline said. "It's a foundation. I'm not naive enough to think one session will fix everything, but it's a start. I wanted to thank you again for your honesty and for trusting us with your story." "We're watching, Caroline," Alicia said, her tone firm but not unkind. "If we see real progress, we'll stay involved. But this can't be for show." "It's not," Caroline assured her. "I promise, this is just the beginning. I'll keep you updated on our next steps." After the call ended, Alicia set her phone down and looked at Marcus. "They're moving in the right direction," she said. "But we'll keep them accountable." Marcus raised his glass. "To keeping them honest," he said with a smirk. Alicia clinked her glass against his. "To that and to making sure this matters." Meanwhile, at the store, Caroline reviewed the feedback collected after the panel discussion. Employees' comments ranged from gratitude for the openness of the conversation to admissions of their own biases. One note caught her attention: hearing their story made me realize I've been part of the problem. I want to do better, not just for my coworkers, but for our customers too. Caroline leaned back in her chair, feeling a cautious sense of hope. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a while, she felt like the company was heading in the right direction. She closed her laptop, knowing that tomorrow would bring more challenges. Change wasn't easy, but it was happening. The following week, the department store launched its revamped inclusivity training program, beginning with an all-staff meeting led by Caroline and diversity consultants. Employees from all departments, including management, sales associates, and security personnel, gathered in the store's auditorium. The atmosphere buzzed with a mix of anticipation and skepticism. Caroline stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding yet approachable. She began by addressing the room. "Thank you all for being here. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our company. This is not just another training session. It's a commitment to growth and accountability." A slide appeared on the screen behind her, displaying the words, "Bias is not always visible, but its impact always is." Caroline let the words sink in before continuing. "Each of us carries biases. They might not be intentional, but they shape how we see the world and how we treat others. Our goal is not to shame or blame but to understand and unlearn these patterns." The lead consultant, Dr. Emily Harper, took the microphone next. "We'll be starting with a series of exercises to help us recognize our unconscious biases," she explained. "These won't be easy, but they're necessary if we want to create real change." One of the first exercises involved employees anonymously answering questions about their assumptions. Questions like, "Have you ever judged someone based on their appearance before learning their story, and have you ever assumed someone didn't belong based on where they were?" Employees used tablets to input their answers, and the data was displayed on a large screen in real time. The responses were eye-opening. Nearly 70% admitted to judging customers based on how they dressed. Over half acknowledged treating coworkers differently based on assumptions about their abilities or backgrounds. The room grew quiet as the weight of these admissions settled over the group. Caroline stepped forward again, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about being honest with ourselves and with each other. These numbers show that we have work to do, and it's work I know we're capable of." The session continued with group discussions where employees were encouraged to share their experiences openly. Some spoke of feeling marginalized by coworkers, while others admitted to unintentionally perpetuating harmful behaviors. The conversations were raw and often uncomfortable, but they marked a turning point in the company's culture. During one discussion, Lisa found herself paired with Derek. "So, how are you feeling about all this?" she asked, genuinely curious. Derek hesitated before answering. "It's a lot to take in," he admitted. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said during the panel and how I used to back Neil up without questioning it. I guess I didn't realize how much harm that attitude could cause." Lisa nodded. "It's not easy to admit that, but it's a step. I've been reflecting too. I think we've all got room to grow." Derek managed a small smile. "Yeah. Feels like I'm starting from scratch. But maybe that's what I need." In another breakout group, Robert, the store manager, faced his own reckoning. A younger employee, Maria, spoke up. "I've been with this company for 3 years, but I've felt invisible most of the time. I work hard, but I've been overlooked for opportunities because I don't fit the image of leadership. I want to feel like I belong here." Robert shifted in his seat, realizing he had been part of the problem without even knowing it. "Maria, thank you for saying that," he said after a pause. "You're right. I've been so focused on what I thought leadership should look like that I haven't been looking at the talent right in front of me. That's on me, and I'll do better." By the end of the session, the room felt different. The initial skepticism had softened, replaced by a sense of shared accountability. Caroline closed the meeting with a challenge. "Change starts with each of us," she said. "But it doesn't end there. I encourage you all to take what you've learned today and apply it not just here at work, but in every aspect of your life. Let's be the example, not the exception." As employees filed out, there was a noticeable shift in the air. For the first time, many of them felt that the changes weren't just surface level, they were the beginning of something real. Caroline stayed behind, watching as her team dismantled the setup. She was exhausted but hopeful. This was the work that mattered, and she was committed to seeing it through. In the weeks following the training, changes began to ripple through the store. Employees who once kept to themselves now interacted with a newfound openness. Conversations about bias and inclusion moved from the training room into casual breakroom discussions. Some staff members even started holding each other accountable in real time. One afternoon, Lisa overheard a junior cashier, Megan, speaking with a customer who was struggling with limited English. I don't understand what you're saying, Megan said, her tone impatient. The customer's shoulders slumped, their discomfort clear. Stepping forward, Lisa gently placed a hand on Megan's shoulder. Let me help, she said before addressing the customer with a warm smile. Using simple words and hand gestures, she clarified the customer's request and ensured they left satisfied. As the customer walked away, Lisa turned to Megan. Hey, she said softly. I know it can be frustrating when there's a language barrier. But remember, they're probably just as frustrated trying to communicate. Patience can go a long way. Megan looked embarrassed but nodded. You're right, she admitted. I wasn't thinking. Thanks for stepping in. Moments like these became more common as employees grew more conscious of their actions. Caroline watched the transformation with cautious optimism. She knew the real test wasn't just in employee behavior but in how customers experienced the changes firsthand. To gauge progress, Caroline implemented a feedback initiative, placing tablets at the store's exits where customers could rate their experience and leave comments. The data trickled in slowly at first but began to paint a clearer picture as more responses accumulated. One comment caught Caroline's attention, the staff seemed genuinely attentive today. I noticed more effort in how they interacted with everyone, not just certain customers. It's refreshing to see, Another comment read, I've been shopping here for years, but for the first time, I felt like my presence was valued. Please keep this up, The feedback wasn't universally positive. Some customers expressed skepticism, calling the changes performative. Caroline viewed even the criticism as an opportunity. It's a marathon, not a sprint, she reminded her team during a meeting. Skepticism is natural. Consistency is how we'll prove we mean it. Meanwhile, Alicia and Marcus remained involved, acting as external advisors to Caroline's initiatives. They met with her regularly to review progress, offering insights and sometimes challenging her approach. At one meeting, Marcus raised a concern. You've made great strides with your employees, Caroline, he said. But what about your hiring practices? If your leadership team doesn't reflect the diversity of your customers, how can you truly understand their needs? Caroline nodded, jotting down notes. You're absolutely right. We've started reviewing our hiring pipeline, but we need to go further. I'll prioritize diversifying our leadership and mentoring underrepresented employees for advancement. Alicia leaned forward, her tone encouraging. You've done well so far, but this can't stop at internal changes. Make sure the community sees this too. Host events, sponsor programs, support causes that align with your values. Let your actions speak louder than your policies. Caroline smiled, grateful for their continued involvement. I appreciate your honesty. You've held us accountable from day one, and that's exactly what we need. One of the most surprising transformations was Derek. Once known for his camaraderie with Neil and his dismissive attitude toward these issues, he had become an unlikely advocate for change. He volunteered to lead smaller breakout discussions with newer employees, sharing his journey of realizing his biases and working to unlearn them. During one session, Derek admitted, when this all started, I thought it was just a way to save face for the company. But now I see how much I had to learn. I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to do better. If I can, anyone can. Lisa, sitting in the back of the room, couldn't help but smile. The Derek she knew months ago would never have said something like that. It was proof that even the most resistant could change with time and effort. As the store continued to evolve, the changes became more visible to customers and staff alike. What had begun as a response to one incident blossomed into a culture shift. But Caroline, Alicia, Marcus, and the rest of the team knew the journey was far from over. True transformation would take time, patience, and relentless commitment. The store's newfound culture of inclusivity reached a pivotal moment one busy Friday evening. The department was packed with shoppers, and the employees were working at full capacity to manage the flow. Among the crowd was a mother with 2 young children, visibly overwhelmed as she tried to navigate the aisles while holding their hands. Lisa noticed the woman struggling and immediately approached her with a warm smile. Hi there, can I help you find something? Or maybe grab a cart for you, she asked, her tone gentle and understanding. The woman hesitated, looking surprised. Oh, thank you, she said, her voice laced with relief. I didn't think anyone noticed. Lisa returned with a cart and stayed nearby, offering assistance as needed. The woman's gratitude was evident, and a nearby customer who witnessed the exchange later left feedback on the store's system. I saw something remarkable today, staff going above and beyond to make someone feel welcome. It's clear things are changing here. In another part of the store, Derek faced a different kind of test. An elderly black man approached the jewelry counter, dressed in worn but neat clothing. The man's movements were slow, his cane clicking against the polished floor. Derek noticed the way a few other shoppers glanced at the man and then quickly looked away, their judgments unspoken but palpable. Without hesitation, Derek stepped forward. "Good evening, sir," he said warmly. "How can I assist you today?" The man looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly as if bracing for the usual dismissive treatment. "I was just looking," he said cautiously, his voice quiet. Derek smiled and nodded. "Take your time. If you see anything you'd like to try on, just let me know, I'll be right here." The man's posture softened, and after a few moments, he pointed to a sleek silver watch. Derek carefully retrieved it, handling the interaction with the same level of professionalism and courtesy he would offer any customer. As the man inspected the watch, Derek treated him not as a curiosity but as someone whose presence mattered.